Good evening. Welcome to Steet Talk. I'm Dominic Cotton. Obviously, my partner in crime, so to speak, is still on sabbatical while he gets some physical issues fixed up with. I hope you continue to say some prayers for Father Russ as he's recovering. He's having a bunch of different work taken care of right at the moment. But we wanted to continue on. I know last week we had on my mayor, Ben Blake from Milford. And along those lines, we have another great mayor and a possible exploratory candidate for the Democrats on the gubernatorial side of life. We have Mayor Dan Drew here from Middletown.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're obviously I've been following you on Facebook for a period of time, and I know some of you people that speak very highly of the job that you've done in Middletown, and I know certainly you're outspoken against some of the issues that are going on within our federal government. Obviously, as things in our I call it our dis-Trumpian society right at the moment as they progress, but obviously, we wanted to have you on. I know for us to get to know you, I know you're in the exploratory phase of a possible run for governor. So really what we're trying to do for our folks on Steet Talk is to really find out a little bit more about all the people that are out there and why they're thinking of running. Why are you thinking of running for governor?
Well, we have a state with huge potential, and I think that we need to focus on the economic needs of our people, and we need to make sure that we do a better job of creating jobs and creating jobs that pay well and that provide economic security for people. And people need good jobs where they can go every day and make a good living and return home and not wonder where they're going to get the money to pay their next mortgage payment or their next rent. Make sure that they have the money it takes to feed their families. That's what drives me, and that's what I've done in Middletown for the last 5.5 years, and I'm interested potentially in doing that on a broader scale. Now, I know economically over in Middletown, I know you've changed some of the way that you've managed the finances within that, and certainly given some of the focus on the economics of that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've been able to help organize and improve things in Middletown? Well, I wouldn't claim exclusive credit for it. We have a really great group of people in town, and I think similar to the way the state of Connecticut has great people everywhere. And what we did in Middletown was we leveraged everybody's abilities really well, and I think that's what we've done as a community. We have a great Chamber of Commerce. I have great partners on the City Council. And so we all work together, and we figure out the best ways to attack our problems. And let me give you an example. In the last couple of years, I took office in November of 2011. Since December of 2011, our unemployment rate has been cut in half. It's literally gone down. It's half of what it used to be. In 2011, when I took office, our bond rating was AA. That's a credit rating for a community. Yep. It's a measurement of your overall financial health. We went from AA to AA plus, and then from AA plus to AAA, and then we were just reaffirmed at AAA, and we've received the 3 lowest interest rate recordings in the city's history ever. So it's a real measurement of our financial health. And we have new businesses coming in all the time, hundreds of new small business openings in the last couple of years. We've had a number of major logistics companies come in, including FedEx Ground, which is building a $250 million regional distribution center in Middletown, which is a very big deal for us.
Wow. So I know for those of us out there that might not understand what it means as far as your bond rating, when you have a AAA bond rating, basically it means that if you want a bond for a school or for other projects along those lines, it costs a lot less money to be able to borrow those and figure out how you're going to pay for them over a longer term. I know economics is obviously, with our state right at the moment, is a big part of what we all need to deal with, because at the moment, with our current budget situation, I almost feel like people are looking at the pie and saying, okay, well, how can we divide this up, instead of looking at how do we grow the pie so that we can meet our obligations that we're going to give to the people of Connecticut.
Sure.
And economics is a huge part of that. You've been able to bring in FedEx. I guess you had a big Aetna complex.
That's where it is. Yeah, it used to. Yeah.
And I know insurance it used to be what our state was all about at one point in time. What sort of industries do you think that we need to look towards to be able to grow our economy, and, like you say, bring in those better paying jobs rather than just the lower paying retail jobs that it seems that we've been saddled with lately?
So a couple highlights to hit in terms of everything
Sure.
that you incorporated into your question. First, the bond rating, yes, is important because it makes your costs lower. But the other thing that it does that's really important is it's a major measurement. It says to the outer world that you're really healthy and really stable. So it actually creates this positive feedback loop where when we have success in that realm, business looks at us and they say, this is a great place for us to be because it's stable and things are predictable and we can budget and we can work with them. So part of the reason we've actually been able to attract more business is because we've been able to highlight our financial stability as a community. That's really important. In terms of attracting specific sectors, we've looked at how to hit the sectors that really work well for the city of Middletown, and I think the state can absolutely do that as well. Insurance is one, because we still have a strong insurance industry here. Defense is another. Biotech is another. Pharmaceuticals is another. Precision manufacturing is another. And so there are a number of industries and fields that thrive in Connecticut. And I think one of the things that we can do to start bringing them here more and more is to, at our public universities, at our community colleges, at our VOTEC schools, create programs that are tailored to the needs of the workforces of those industries. If you could graduate from a four-year state university with a degree in insurance services or actuarial services specific to the insurance needs of the companies that we have here, there are actuarial programs, but for them to be very specifically tailored to the needs of the companies we have, then we're pairing up what our students are doing with what these companies' needs are. If we look at the needs of Pratt & Whitney throughout Connecticut, or Sikorsky, which is a little closer to where we are right now, and we create machining programs that are very specifically focused towards the needs of those companies, then we make Connecticut an indispensable and incredibly valuable place to do business in the long run.
I think, and sometimes everybody forgets this, people are our biggest assets. And the more we can keep our younger people in Connecticut and not have them maybe go to our public colleges and universities and then take a hike out of town as soon as they're done graduating to different areas, keeping that's what's going to make us strong. And I agree with you. I have difficulty right at the moment. I know some of the proposals put out by the current administration were looking to take money away or even close down some of the VOTEC schools. I know I have one of them down in Milford. Stratford and Sikorsky is big not just for the manufacturing, but it's also big for the parts that go into the manufacturing. That's right. And that's really where like that kind of secondary like trail kind of, like throwing a rock into the middle of a pond, kind of goes out, and the waves kind of get like a little bit bigger and bigger as they go out from there. And I, for the life of me, can't understand, even on the federal level, and taking a look at some of the budget proposals put out in the skinny budget, talking about increasing defense spending, which is well and good, but taking away from the training programs that we need in order to be able to have those people down at Electric Boat, down at, in Sikorsky's, up at Pratt & Whitney. And so, education is, I think, huge for our state, and especially since I see manufacturing changing. Well, I mean, this is the reality, is there's going to be more automation out there. There's going to be higher levels of education that you have to have in order to do manufacturing. So education obviously is a huge part of that. And you're right, figuring out the way to be able to bring that forward in our universities. But when we talk about the cost and looking at some of the programs and the policies about how our universities are run, I guess I'm not really sure how we reorganize some of that to make it cost effective. I mean, do you have any thoughts about like on our current like university system and what we can do within that?
When I bring up the university system, what I'm talking about doing here is making sure that as much of, and not just the university system, the community colleges, the VOTEC high schools, all of these institutions are really important. And you know, I think in the long run, rather than looking at where we can be really lean in the budgets of these organizations, which I think they're already doing, I think these organizations are pretty lean for the most part. The universities, the community colleges, and the VOTEC schools. I think what we need to do is invest in the programs that they offer. You know, if you're a kid who wants to go to a VOTEC school and come out with, you know, knowledge in a skilled trade and be able to, you know, at age 18, get into the workforce and market yourself and begin a career that's going to last you a lifetime and really build on that, that's really important. And to the degree that we can tailor that curriculum to the needs of employers in Connecticut, then we're going to make the young men and women who are graduating really marketable to these companies. You know, in the region that we're sitting in right now, if there's a kid who graduates from a VOTEC school, and again, I'll use the example of you know, precision manufacturing. If that precision manufacturing degree program in that high school is geared towards defense manufacturing, either for, you know, aerospace, for helicopters, or perhaps for you know, the marine industry, for electric boat, then that person's going to be employable in a field and in a career and for a company that's going to treat them really well and where they can build a really solid career over the course of a lifetime. That's what we need to focus on, because that's what's going to return significant dividends to us over time. That's what helps us grow. And rather than just simply saying, you know, here's where we need to cut more, we need to think of how to make it more valuable, because it's that value-added proposition that's going to grow the pie rather than to cut it. I mean, you know, if we are always cutting in the short term, sure, we can save money in 1 year's budget, but there's an opportunity cost in the long run. And I would rather see us invest in that realm where, you know, like I said, somebody graduating from VOTEC high school or a trade program at a community college can come out of school with the skills that they need to really add value immediately to the economy and have opportunities for themselves to grow and to take care of their families.
Now, I know with anything, I think when you're talking about government, obviously you have to be able to get your financial house in order. And I think you changed around in Middletown the way that you handled your finances within that. I think I'm talking about your education and your, as they say, the two sides of the budget. You were able to put a different financial system in place that you utilize?
What we did was, so this is, you know, this is a kind of a long and boring explanation, but Connecticut state law requires right now the separation of municipal finances and education finances. And there's some virtue to that, but it creates some unintended consequences too. And one of them, I think, is a lack of accountability in how school districts spend money. And there's no backstop, either directly, because boards of education don't directly issue taxes. City councils and mayors and boards of finance do that. So basically under Connecticut law, the Board of Education has complete autonomy over its own money, but someone else is responsible for coming up with the money. But another quirk of the law is that the Board of Education is guaranteed to get as much as it did the year before. We have to give them at least as much as they had the year before, and so does every other town and city in the state. So what that does is it creates a situation in which school administrators know they have at least as much money as they had the year before, and that they have total control over how they spend that money. So what often happens in a lot of towns and cities throughout the state is a school board and a superintendent of schools will demand a certain amount of money in their budget or ask for a certain amount of money in their budget, and there isn't always the opportunity to see how that money is being spent in a way that's as accountable as you would like it to be. And so what ends up happening is when towns and cities are financially strapped because of the problems going on at the state, or because we're operating off of regressive local property tax, what ends up happening is the school boards and the superintendents target for cuts things that are near and dear to the community, and there's nothing the town or city can do to stop it. So what they'll do is they'll say, we're going to cut this many elementary school teachers, or we're going to cut the football program at the high school, or we're going to cut the arts program at this school. And the community gets into an uproar in a lot of cases, and it's understandable. When there are other places very often that municipal officials feel could be cut out of school budgets, like consultants and outsourcing, that's taking away the work of local people and sending it to companies that aren't from here. And so we have a good relationship with our school board. We entered into a venture with them to join our finance apparatus. And so now we can see entirely what they're doing, and we're all on the same platform. So we can literally, from our finance office, look up what's going on in their finance office and understand it completely, apples to apples. Whereas in most places in Middletown before, it was apples to oranges, and we couldn't even see the orange. So it's a totally different circumstance now. But I think the system needs a little more fundamental reform at the state level. People always ask, why are superintendents' salaries so high throughout the state? And they are unbelievably high in an awful lot of places. I would argue that it's not because of some supply and demand issue in the market, it's because you have a limited number of people who are certified to do that job, but more importantly, they are in charge of the budget virtually exclusively, and they're guaranteed to get as much as they had the year before, and nobody who's responsible for coming up with the money can say what it goes towards. Of course their salaries are higher under circumstances like that. So, there needs to be an additional layer of accountability. And I think there's one of two ways to do it. And I think you could give communities the option. I think you could either empower boards of education to levy taxes themselves, and you take that out of the city's responsibility, and that would create a direct link of accountability directly with voters. Or you could have a board of finance or a city council or a board of selectmen as the accountability backstop for what the board's going to do line by line. That accountability is important, because without it, what happens is key programs get threatened for cuts. There's nothing anyone can do about it, and then very often money is diverted into places that aren't necessary, like consultants and like companies to do outsourced work. So that's something that I think is important to look at.
I know on the budget side, because I just went through this with our mayor the other day. When you're talking about the government side of running the day-to-day operations, I know they report to a board of finance in Milford, and the board of finance gets to go through line by line, and they produce a budget based on that, and then it has to be voted on by the aldermen, and the mayor's involved in the process. I think the difficulty, like you say, is if you don't have that level of accountability to what you're doing, you can't. Now, when we think about right at the moment, I know in the governor's proposal for Middletown, I know we have this big to-do about educational cost sharing. And I know my town got body slammed. They basically went down to about zero on the educational cost sharing. Mm-hmm. I know some of the cities, including Middletown, we're going to get some more on the educational funding. I think rather than look at like the specifics of the dollar amount, it kind of calls into question the bigger picture. How do we help our cities be able to deal with educating people within the communities? Because like we're talking about with the opportunities for manufacturing and other things along those lines, they need to be able to have the basis to be able to build those things on. How do how do we help them to better educate their populace and fund that?
So one of the big problems here is, first of all, with the new proposal in the educational cost sharing formula, what it does is it takes a lot of money from towns and cities that are doing a little bit better, and then others that are kind of in the middle, and it puts a lot of the monies back into some of the cities. And Middletown was proposed to do much better under this system. We didn't use those numbers, by the way, in developing my budget, because I don't think they're going to last. I don't think they're actually going to come to fruition. So we chose not to rely on them because it puts us in a safer position in the long run. It was a more conservative way of approaching the budget. But the bigger issue is that rather than just fix the ECS formula, which is the Educational Cost Sharing Grant, we need to look at how the state creates the relationship between cities and boards of education. Everything I just talked about a minute ago in the last question is something that drives costs locally. It's something that makes the cost of running a school board unnecessarily more expensive. I bet if you audited a lot of school boards around the state, you would find an awful lot of consultants, you would find an awful lot of administrators making very good money, and you'd find an awful lot of outsourced work that could be done by local people much less expensively than it's being done by the companies to which it's being outsourced. So there's a huge way of saving money right there. And then there are a number of laws on the books that make operating a school district more expensive. You know, we call them unfunded mandates, and a lot of them are anachronistic. They don't work anymore. They worked to solve a very specific problem that isn't applicable to everybody, or they were relevant in the time in which they were passed and have outgrown their useful life. So I think we need to change a lot of those things. And then we need to recognize that the cities have a disproportionate number of challenges that a lot of suburban districts don't face. We have them in Middletown. You have higher populations of English as a second language students. You have a higher prevalence of students with mental health needs. Part of the reason that a huge number of these costs are falling onto the cities is because the state is not able to handle its social service platform and its social service responsibilities the way it used to because of the funding situation. So, you know, I've been saying for years, when that money gets cut out of the state budget, again, back to the question of opportunity cost, you could save money to balance a budget in 1 year, but you're creating huge costs and have huge opportunity costs down the line, because if you're ignoring somebody's mental health needs or social service needs, then what ends up happening is it doesn't get ignored. It creates other problems that are worse and more expensive later. And where does it end up falling? It ends up falling to the town or city or the school board. In the case of a child that has those needs, it ends up falling to the school board. So what happens is that responsibility is now, it used to cost this much, now it costs this much, and it used to be paid for by the state when it was here, and the state's not paying for it here anymore. So now, in addition to it costing this much, your local school board has to handle it, which means that your local taxpayers are paying for it, and they're paying for a more expensive service delivery. And the way they're doing it is through a regressive local property tax, rather than when it was done by the state and it was being paid for by income taxes, which are much more progressive than the property tax we have. And that's one of the other big problems that has to be fixed. That's job one. We're over-reliant on our property tax in Connecticut. And if you own a home or if you rent, you're paying property tax on your real estate, because you're even if you're a renter, your tax is built into your lease. And if you own a motor vehicle, you're paying for it. You're paying your property taxes on your car. And if you're a business owner, you pay on your lamp and your desk and everything inside your building. So that's a really regressive way of raising revenue. And all it enables us to do ultimately is nibble around the edges. And then we've got very little room to actually make any impactful change that helps people, because we can't pay for it. Because the only way to adequately pay for it is to overtax someone on their real property. And that disproportionately impacts working and middle class people. And that's not right. So that system has to be fixed.
Well, how do you feel about the other big educational proposal, which was putting some of the cost of pensions for teachers? And I know that's not across the board. I know it's a big chunk of change, but it's different for different communities. Do you think by doing that you're putting more responsibility back down to the cities to say, okay, well, you know, if you pay this amount to your teachers, you have to look at being able to pay this amount for your pension? Do you think there should be some accountability on that level?
I think there should always be accountability, but this is the wrong way to do it. Okay. You know, the state decided to take on this responsibility a long time ago. And had this system been set up For municipalities to take it on at the inception, that'd be a different story. But the state took on this responsibility and can't turn around and say, hey, towns and cities, you handle it. And again, I'll say this is part of the reason. When it's paid for by the state, it's being paid for by an income tax, primarily, and sales taxes. When it goes to the municipalities, it's only being paid for by a property tax, which means that it eases up the burden on the really, really wealthy people and puts it back onto the hands of local taxpayers, which is regressive. And again, disproportionately impacts the working and middle classes. It's going to have a negative economic impact writ large. The better way to do things is to work on the progressive side of things and to simultaneously cut our expenses by reforming how our system works. You know, we can, like we did this in Middletown. Rather than hacking apart our budget and destroying services to the public, what we did was we actually combined services in some departments in a way that wasn't obvious, but cost us much less money over the long run. So let me give you an example. When I took office, the city and the Board of Education were suing each other. The city and the Planning and Zoning Commission were suing each other. The city had lawsuits all over the place, and we were getting sued all the time for adverse employment actions. What we ended up doing was we took our HR department and we reorganized it into our legal department. So our HR staff, rather than operating on its own, had to report to our lawyers, in particular, a dedicated labor attorney. We actually hired a couple of more lawyers, and we ended up saving a huge amount of money in the long run. Because even though we had to hire a few more lawyers, what we did was we took a couple positions that were coming vacant, we combined them through attrition, and then we ended up not having to hire as many law firms to do our work, and simultaneously we're able to operate better on the front end, so we didn't get sued as much. So now we get sued in these cases vastly less than we used to, and when we do, we usually win. So we're in a much stronger position now, and our outside counsel expenses have gone from here down to here. And we save tremendous amounts of money in the long run, and we deliver better public services to our people as a result. So that type of approach is important, I think, at the state level and can save you a lot of money in the long run.
And I know a lot of times I read in or I hear testimony coming from a lot of the state's own departments, like Department of Transportation. They're always saying, why are we outsourcing to other people for design, specifications and other things when we could be able to do this in-house? Is that something you might look more towards?
Yes. Our Board of Education last year was outsourcing, I mentioned outsourcing earlier in the boards, was outsourcing its maintenance and its cafeteria work to a company called Sodexo, which is based in Europe. That's where their headquarters is. And I didn't feel that we were getting the value for our money that we were told that we were getting, and pushed really hard for them to abandon Sodexo, which they've done for maintenance services and I think may do for their cafeteria services, because these companies don't do this work for free. They do it for a profit. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're out to make a profit, and fine, no problem. But we don't have to hire them. I would rather hire someone who is a person and they are making a salary and they're not charging you a profit premium on top of it. And then there are incentives to come to work every day and do the work for you, and you can save a lot of money in the long run. Some services you have to contract for because they require specialization that's too expensive to keep in-house, or because you reach a volume of work in-house that you can't handle just with your staff. But in the long run, I think we should move away from outsourcing as much as we possibly can. There's no reason that we should be paying a premium to get basic public services done. And one thing that's very often ignored when we talk about the cost of outsourcing is that these companies, because they're for-profit companies, when they're making purchases on behalf of their government contracts, are paying sales tax. The company that we had in our schools last year was paying $90,000 a year in sales tax for food and cleaning supplies. Why on earth should the taxpayers of Middletown or any other community be paying sales tax as an exempt organization? Your tax-exempt organization is a school board. That $90,000 was worth 2 brand new teachers. So why on earth were we discussing layoffs at a time when we could have just gotten rid of this company? And that's what we ended up doing. But it was after a big fight. We pushed really hard to get rid of Sodexo, and luckily we didn't end up having any teacher layoffs. But it shouldn't even be on the table when you've got a company doing outsourcing that's charging you $90,000 a year to cover its sales tax expenses, and it's charging you depreciation of the assets it's buying for you, and it's got a profit built in. That just doesn't make any sense to me at all, and I do think we should move away from outsourcing.
Now, talking about this on the bigger picture, and I know the big boogeyman in the room, and certainly this is going to come larger and larger as time goes on, is pension payments, and if you're not outsourcing, the level of benefits that people in state government receive. And I don't necessarily think it's the sustainability of the current people that we have, but it's the impact of ones that we've unfunded for a long period of time, having an impact on the ones that we currently have in place now. How would you handle currently what we're having to deal with? And I know the governor is looking to reduce costs from pensions and health care to the tune of, I think it was like $750 million a year. If you were in that position, how would you deal with that? And I know that's a bigger, much larger question because there's a lot of moving pieces that go into that.
Well, so first of all, for a long time, the state didn't fund pensions at all, and that's being done now. So that's a good thing because you can't take on a huge liability and then not fund it over time. You will reach a point where there's a disaster and the bill comes due. So the state is taking a very responsible position in funding that now because that has to be done. But I think it's also important to point out that these benefits have sort of become, I think you used the term boogeyman in the press. We're not in this position because of public employee benefits. That's I think that's really important to point out because simultaneously we have in our tax code tax loopholes that enable companies to hide money offshore and not report it. And we have a tax code that disproportionately impacts the working and middle class relative to the very wealthiest people we have in our state. And there's this old canard that gets repeated all the time that if the rate goes up a little bit more on the people who are the wealthiest, that they'll take off for another state. And there have been studies, multiple studies, that have shown that that's not the case. People don't leave one state to go to another just because of their state level income taxes. So I think we give, what I'm getting at is that while we're talking about pensions, and that has to be fixed, I'm not claiming that it doesn't, while we're talking about that, nobody's looking at this, which is the fact that we give away a tremendous amount of money to people who are really wealthy, and that our tax code is built for you and I and other middle and working class people to be subsidizing the very richest people among us. And that's something that has to be looked at as well. I mean, what's the value of the tax credits that we give away in any given year? And are we sure that they're working properly for their intended purpose? There's a lot of money going out the door for some of those purposes, and that's a really important consideration also.
Well, now talking about, and I know we've offered some of these things out, and some of them I think have been extremely beneficial. Some of them are questionable about the money that we've given to companies. I think Sikorsky, considering their place in the community and how much, like I said, they have that ripple effect, as well as what was put into place within the bill, I think was a very well-written one, and it got voted on pretty widely. How do you feel about some of these sort of wealth management corporations and being funded to, say, move from Westport to Stamford? Do you think it's worthwhile giving them the credits, or is that something that we got to look at from a bigger perspective?
I don't think it's worthwhile. I think it's wrong. I think it's an incorrect use of public resources, and I don't think we should be giving money away to hedge funds. I don't think that while we're cutting a social service budget and towns and cities are struggling to figure out how to pay for public schools, that the world's richest hedge fund should be getting money from the people of the state of Connecticut. That makes no sense to me at all. From an economic development standpoint, occasionally, offering a tax abatement, offering a credit of some type might make sense. And we occasionally use tax abatements at the local level in Middletown as a tool, but it's not your only mechanism. And it's not even the one that I've found to be most effective. Let me get back to FedEx. I mentioned FedEx earlier.
Sure.
And we worked with the state on that, and they were very helpful in that regard. But the reason FedEx ultimately came to Middletown, we were competing against Massachusetts and Rhode Island to get them. The reason they came to Middletown was that they wanted to get up and moving as quickly as possible. And they said, despite whatever incentives we had on the table, the real money for them was in being able to get going and move on schedule. So what we did was we made the process as easy as we possibly could. I dedicated building officials to their project and their project alone, with a pledge to backfill and hire new people to handle our responsibilities, particularly because that's a revenue generating position for us. But it helped FedEx be sure that they were going to be able to move their project when and how they needed to and get it going on schedule. Before they even started, before they even applied, we promised them a 3-month application process, which is a very quick application process anywhere in the country for a $250 million facility. And this one is very nearly $250 million as a construction job. What we did was we brought in every department that has any regulatory authority whatsoever in the city of Middletown. Fire marshal, environmental scientist, health department, planning department, police traffic division, you name it. We had a big table set up in City Hall, and I brought in the FedEx executives, their attorneys, and their engineers. And we went around the table with their application and with their design plans. And our environmental scientists said, move this culvert this way by 5 feet. And the police said, move the road back 5 feet this way. I'm making up examples here, but it was like that. And so by the FedEx engineers were furiously scribbling their notes. They went and made the changes to the plans. So by the time they submitted the plan, they knew everything that was going to be required for it to be successful, and they knew they had a winner. So we were able to move them in 3 months through Middletown Inland Wetlands, Middletown Common Council, Middletown Planning and Zoning, Cromwell Inland Wetlands, and Cromwell Planning and Zoning. Done. And that's why they were us. Then we worked with the company to get them to hire local Connecticut construction workers. And so the vast majority of workers on that job are people from the region where the construction is taking place, rather than a contractor bringing in workers from other states, which happens all the time. So the project was a huge economic boon for us, and it wasn't because we threw a ton of money at the company. It was because we worked with them on what mattered to them, which was getting going as quickly as possible, and we ended up winning, and they ended up winning as a result.
Just kind of look at it like government is customer service. And you have different customers that are out there, and it's important that you meet the needs of those people. I know years ago, not to say anything bad about my own town, but I know we had a poor reputation as far as our building department for getting things through, and it seemed like it was slow and monotonous. And those things hold up major projects. And I know streamlining that for our local government has helped push through some like 400 different projects, and that's the lifeblood of your city.
It is. You have a wonderful mayor in Milford, and he's, I think, very cognizant of all these issues.
Yeah.
For us, I can't speak to anyone else's experience, but we have a very nimble, adaptable, focused building department. And they are able to move these projects, and they know it's a priority of mine and the city councils and the chambers, and we all work together on it. And that's why we've been as successful as we have. And, the beauty of it is we haven't sacrificed any of our regulatory responsibilities. When we brought FedEx to the table, we didn't say, don't worry about this. You don't have to do X, Y, or Z. We made them do everything they were supposed to do. Everyone has to follow the same rules. But we made the process of following those rules easy and quick and inexpensive.
So I know as an overview, I'll let the secret out of the bag here. You have a degree in industrial organizational psychology, which has to do with really how the design of systems goes into place, and figuring out the ways to be able to best utilize those. How do you think that education has translated into what you've been able to do for Middletown?
Well, I think it helps helps you understand, like you said, sort of the systems level issues that you're dealing with. Very often, if you see a problem, the problem is usually a symptom of a deeper malady. And if you can kind of trace that symptom and recognize that symptom isn't the actual problem, and trace it back to its source, then you figure out what to fix. let me use an example I was talking about earlier. With the amount of money Middletown used to spend on outside counsel, millions of dollars on legal bills, you could look at that and say, wow, that's our problem. But the deeper problem was the structure. And so we figured out how to fix the structure, and now we spend millions less on law firms than we used to. So I think it's been very helpful to me in just understanding how everything works. I didn't get the degree until my second term in office, though. So we'd actually already been doing some of this stuff prior to that. And, I think more than anything, life experience has been valuable for me. And even more important than that is, I think, anyone's willingness to listen to other people and bring other people's ideas to the table. And it's that collaboration with people on the city council and in the chamber and our employees and people in the community and in nonprofit groups. That's what makes Middletown really tick, because no one person ever has all the right ideas, and you get a lot by bringing other people's ideas in and listening to what other people have to say.
Certainly, I know collaboration is a big, huge part of it. I know right at the moment, our legislature is slightly divided in the Senate. It's a difficult position of moving things forward. That may change in a couple of years. We don't know, but I know there seems to have been a disconnect in the way our government has worked in the recent past, and I think having that approachability is a big, huge thing for communities out there, because you're right, nobody has one right answer. And you have to be able to come to the table with ideas and work with the people that you have. And I know sometimes it's been difficult. And I know that because I can speak from my own personal experience, because I've certainly had my issues with our current governor, not our lieutenant governor. We love our lieutenant governor. But sometimes, there are points in time where you feel like the wheels are in motion and the train's coming down the rails, and unless you're like Superman, like standing up in front of it, to be able to stop the train with some of where the departments are going is very difficult. I know we're currently facing that right at the moment with our major state park, Silver Sands. They have a proposal to change what is something that's very natural and beautiful and not really developed, and do this big, huge development that absolutely nobody in the surrounding community wants, or the surrounding towns, not just our community. And to spend money on something that they could, right size. But often, and I know I can speak from my own experience, I feel like this is coming down the railroad. And I know I've gone and talked to Tom Tyler, who's like the head of state parks, and tried to have long, I had him on the phone for like 2-3 hours, like one morning, going through all the different proposals and everything else. And it just seems like, even though nobody wants something, it's like they're going to push it through. How would you handle something like that?
Well, I don't know anything about this particular
Sure.
situation, and I've had times where, just to be totally transparent, where I believe a particular course of action is right, and what I do is, at the beginning, I do my best to get as many people on board as we can, and if it means changing some of what I'm proposing to do, then I'm happy to do that, as long as it doesn't fundamentally alter the goal. And I think bringing other people's voices in really matters. And again, I can't speak to the situation
Sure,
with
no,
this
no,
park,
no.
because I don't know the details. I don't know why. I don't know any of the particulars. But I would say, bringing in people who are involved locally, people whose lives are going to be affected, is really important. And you have to get the buy-in of as many people as you possibly can. And sometimes you have reasonable people that disagree, and you work on an issue, and the chips fall where they may. But the right approach, I think, is getting everybody involved. Involvement leads to commitment, and if people have a voice and a stake, and you really truly listen to them and try to make some of the the changes that they're looking for, then I think you can be successful. In most instances, not in all of them.
No,
It's a complicated process, and it's not always smooth, and
there's a lot of
not
moving
easy.
pieces
Yeah.
going into this. Now, I know another one. Obviously, I work in the healthcare field, and I've been involved in a lot of different programs. I know one of the other big thing that is going around local government is talking about privatization of some of like the state facilities and other things along those, not necessarily to an outsourced, but to a not-for-profit. And I guess I look at that in two ways. I think we've really depended upon our not-for-profits for a long period of time, but often I find that there are two different systems. One is a lot more highly funded than the other, and I know not-for-profits are sometimes at an extreme disadvantage. How would you look at dealing with sort of like the whole idea of like privatization, say in the, like the DDS facilities and other things that are going along right now? Because I think there was one close by to you guys that they were looking to shut down. I think in Meriden, which is a smaller one. But I know I had a friend of mine with the one in Stratford that they closed down and had to move her son, and there was a lot of anxieties and difficulties within that from a lot of different perspectives. But
I'm against privatizing public services. First of all, I don't think it's always limited to nonprofits. There are for-profit companies that get into privatization business all over the place. So, if it's being privatized to save money, you have to ask yourself, how is the money being saved? And are the services being delivered properly? Very often what happens when you outsource a contract is, they'll cut down a certain portion of the contract. They'll really reduce significantly worker salaries and worker protections, which hurts your public service delivery. But what ends up happening is a huge delta ends up going to the management of some of these organizations. So you have to be very careful about it. We have dedicated public servants who are well trained, particularly when you're dealing with, you use the example of DDS, people with specialties in dealing with people that have developmental disabilities. That's not something that you can do on the cheap easily without creating additional consequences. And I learned at a young age, and my parents drilled into me, you get what you pay for. And so that's something to be mindful of, because if you don't take care of some of these responsibilities, they will come back to bite you, or they will spill over and become more expensive later, or manifest themselves as other problems. These issues don't go away. When the state doesn't do them, they fall to towns and cities. And if the towns and cities aren't handling them properly, they fall into the school systems, or they end up on your streets, and then suddenly you have police issues, or you have other challenges. They're always there. And the question is how you deal with them. And outsourcing, I don't think, is the way, because it usually has a profit margin built into it. And I think, the argument that it's less expensive, while that may be true in any one budget year in the short term, is not true in the long term.
So it's almost like, how do we make it more efficient from the inside instead of trying to outsource it from and push off the responsibility on the other end of it?
Yeah.
So I know we got about another 8 minutes, and I want to give you. I know we've been talking about a lot of the major issues that are going on in our state. Really, to discuss why you're thinking about running for this. I mean, what is your stump speech? I know I seen the YouTube one on there about who you are and what you think you bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said at the beginning of the show, I think what's really important in Connecticut is the economy, and I think that's got to get back on track for people. There are jobs out there that, are available to people but don't pay a living wage and don't have benefits. And if, you're trying to take care of your family or build a life or get a bigger house or fix up your car, these things matter. And so I think that's what our policies need to be focused on. So what's the best for the vast majority of people out there economically? And if we can move towards that position, if we can move towards that goal, then a lot of the rest of the problems we have, I think, will to some degree work themselves out.
As I'm going to call you, you're the man in the middle from Middletown who's trying to get things moving for the middle class, it sounds like.
Yeah. I never thought of using the word middle that many times, but I guess you could characterize it that way.
Well, I know we certainly enjoyed having you on here. We're gonna look obviously as your exploratory campaign moves on here. I know you're going to be announcing soon your numbers for how well you did on the first quarter. For everybody that's out there to realize that to be able to get public campaign financing, you have to raise over $250,000. But they're not from large organizations. They're from people like me and you giving anywhere from $10 up to $100 in order to support the people that you really think are going to be best for you or best for the community. So I like the fact of campaign financing, and I like the fact of the small amounts of money that people have to raise. I know it's very difficult. But I think what you're doing in the same process is if you're able to raise that money, you have the buy-in of the community, because there's going to be anywhere upwards from 5 to 25,000 people that are going to be out there and donating to your campaign.
Correct. You don't have to use this system.
No.
And it imposes a lot of restrictions, and it imposes, you're kind of agreeing to be handcuffed in the traditional mechanism of fundraising. But I think it's just a much cleaner way to do business, and it's better for the people and for the process of governing in the long run. Oh,
I do, completely. I think the more you get dark money out of things and the cleaner the process, I think that's a huge benefit to Connecticut. I know some people are going to disagree because they see the actual dollar amounts, but I think it brings together, an honest candidate. Your candidacy, how you raise your money, who you're beholden to. If you're beholden to the people of Connecticut and not some major campaign donator, I mean, take a look at what's going on the federal side. God, I wish we could fix that, because that was, God ugly from all sides. I can't thank you enough for coming down.
Thanks for having me.
And we certainly appreciate you having you on here. And we're certainly gonna look and keep an eye on your candidacy. And we're wishing you well, because I think obviously you're a quality person for the job. And I hope that this is something that comes to fruition.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out on Steet Talk.
You.
And for all you guys out there, obviously this might be played a few times on as we go on throughout this whole process. We're obviously looking at some of the gubernatorial candidates or possible candidates as we go on and bringing them to you. I know next time around we're actually going to have some people down to talk about solar energy, because saving the environment's an important part of our lives, and certainly that's going to help within the environment and everything else. So for all you guys, I hope you have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time on Steet Talk.